Many of us arrive at this new year carrying heavy hearts. Some of us are more frightened than we ever remember being. The lives and livelihoods of people we know have been upended. Queer and trans individuals and their parents are facing rejection, threats, and fear for their safety. Immigrants in our families, our neighborhoods, our communities are being torn from their homes, their lives, and they are facing uncertain futures of detention or deportation. As Jews, we are still reeling from the horrors of October 7th, the unspeakable violence against our cousins in Israel, and the crushing human toll of the war in Gaza. We are living in a time of resurgent anti-Semitism, of political unraveling, of authoritarianism rising, where we once assumed democracy was secure. And on top of all of that, the reality of climate change undermines the very ground beneath our feet. This is the place where we are. Dislocated, unmoored, without easy answers. No band-aids, no denials will serve. It's not the place any of us wanted to find ourselves in. In fact, it's not likely a place many of us would have imagined even a year ago. Yet this is the place where we are. So what do we do in such a place? How do we find the hope to lead us out of despair and the courage to walk forward despite our fear? We read about Hagar and Ishmael, Abraham's concubine and eldest son, cast into the wilderness by Abraham at Sarah's insistence. Their safety, their home, their very sense of belonging gone in an instant. Alone in the desert with no water and her son near death, Hagar cannot even bear to watch. She sets him down under a bush and moves away. She hides her face. She weeps. And then Ishmael weeps. They too find themselves in a place that they did not want to be. And then we read, God heard the cry of the boy, Ba'asher Husham, where he was. Where was he? He was nowhere in particular, not a sacred site, not a holy mountaintop, just there, over there, a desolate, nondescript in-between place. Yet God heard his cry where he was. God did not wait for Ishmael to become someone else, or to be somewhere else, or to have more faith or more hope. God met him right there, right there. That phrase, Ba'asher Husham, is striking. It can mean where he was, but it's more literally translated that he was there. In other words, he wasn't even in a place. He was just somewhere over there. And yet, even in that vagueness, God shows up. We can contrast that with our ancestor Jacob. One generation later, Jacob, Ishmael's nephew, also finds himself in an in-between place. He too is on the run, in between, cast out from his home. Sleeping with a rock for a pillow, he dreams of angels ascending and descending on a ladder. And when he wakes, he exclaims, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh, va'anochi lo yadati. Surely God is in this place and I did not know it. Ma nora hamakom hazeh. How awesome is this place? We've been singing those words, Ma nora hamakom hazeh, throughout our services. Surely God is in this place. Jacob names his location a place. In doing so, he creates memory, holiness, and encounter. From that moment, our tradition takes one of its most treasured names for God, Hamakom, the place, the shelter, home. But Ishmael, he's not in a place. He's just over there. And yet, so is God. This year, many of us feel kind of over there, or maybe not quite here. We're in between, in a place that feels, frankly, for some of us, placeless. But can we take comfort from Ishmael's story? Can we find the key to turning a wilderness of despair, an unnamed over there, into a makom, a place of God's presence? What shifts in the story? Not triumph, not victory, not resolution, not naming. Simply this: God heeded the cry of the boy. God heeded the cry of the boy. The cry itself, the raw, unfiltered outpouring of pain, is what drew God near. The recognition, the acknowledgement of suffering, stemming from deep compassion, from our love for one another, from our love of God's creation, from our love of life itself, sets the stage for a new beginning. This is our invitation this year, to look honestly at our despair, our dislocation, for many of us, our grief, and cry out. The way through, according to today's story, is not to deny our anguish, not to paper over our grief, not to numb ourselves with the easy distraction so many corporations are intent on feeding us, but instead to give voice to our pain, to each other's pain, and to the pain of the world. Because when we cry out, when we scream our pain, when we protest in the streets, we affirm that we are alive. We affirm that we care. We affirm that we will not let suffering, our own or someone else's, go unnoticed. The cry itself is an act of profound resistance against despair. The cry itself is an act of courage. It's actually easier to be silent. The cry itself becomes a proof of compassion, dare I say, a proof of love. And the cry, like the cry of the shofar, demands attention. It demands divine attention. In the crying out, we hear a prayer, a protest, we hear compassion, and we begin to move the barren there, nowhere, into a sacred makom. Reading the story of Hagar and Ishmael on this day reminds us that courage is not only to be found among those who choose their battles, those with lofty ideals and goals, but also among those whose only goal may be to survive, to live to see another day, not knowing what that day may bring. The cry of Ishmael lives on in others who also found themselves in places they never wanted to be. Atlanta's own John Lewis, standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, cried out against Jim Crow with his very blood. Larry Kramer cried out, demanding that the world pay attention as the AIDS crisis ravaged his community. Malala Yousafzai, who was shot for daring to pursue an education as a girl in Afghanistan, continues to cry out for the rights of women and girls across the globe. None of them knew what their cries would bring. None of them knew that their cries would change history. They only knew that giving in to despairing silence was not an option. And that is the place we are in today. Like Hagar, like Ishmael, like so many who came before us, we do not know how our story will end. We only know that this moment of pain, this dislocation, where most of us don't want to be, is simply the place where we are. And from this place, we must cry out. On Rosh Hashanah, we cry out with the shofar. The sound of the shofar is not particularly eloquent. It's not polished. It's raw. It's broken. It's jagged. Sometimes it doesn't get there at all. But it is the voice of our ancestors, the voice of our people, the voice of our own hearts. It is Ishmael's cry. It is Hagar's weeping. It is our refusal to stay silent in the face of despair. Now I'm going to quote the Lord of the Rings, so I'm letting you in on a secret. That is one of the places I look for Torah. And the Lord of the Rings, the hero Frodo, laments to the wizard Gandalf, "I wish none of this had happened in my lifetime." And Gandalf replies, "So do all who live to see such things. But that is not for them to decide. All you have to do is decide what to do with the time you are given." We cannot choose the place in which history has set us. We don't get to choose the time in which we find ourselves. All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that we are given. And we can choose not to stay silent. We can choose to cry out our pain. We can choose to sound the shofar of our souls against injustice and acknowledge each other's suffering. And in so doing, we are choosing to express compassion and love. In the very place we find ourselves today, and the place most of us didn't want to be, and many of us worked hard to prevent from coming, we can still choose over and over again to cry out for love. This year, I ask you and encourage you to join me as we cry out and choose the voice of love.